Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Daniel Willcocks is an international best-selling author and award-nominated podcaster of dark fiction. He is an author coach, 1/5 of digital story studio Hawk and Cleaver. He is co-founder of iTunes busting fiction podcast The Other Stories, CEO of horror imprint Devil's Rock Publishing, and the co-host of Next Level Authors podcast. Phew! Dan is furiously passionate about all things story. He has written 40 plus novels in 5 years for himself and on behalf of ghostwriting clients. Dan now also provides author coaching services designed to help authors take the stories that they are dying to tell and get them out onto the page. So let's have a chat with Daniel and find out a little bit more about his journey to writing, how he has managed to be so productive, and find out more about the author services he provides, particularly his online community Activated Authors. So let's dive in. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to chat to you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I wonder if you'd start off just by telling us about your own journey to writing.
Yeah, cool. So I always tell people I'm not one of these authors who have basically dreamed of being an author from as when they were tiny little children. I've always enjoyed writing. I've always enjoyed reading, and when I was younger, there was definitely a part of me that thought writing would be a cool career to go into, but I never really saw that as accessible or in any way something that I could achieve. And over the years, I've tried lots of different things through my life. I've done lots of different jobs and kind of just worked my way around a bunch of different careers, and ended up graduating in 2012 doing English and drama. And it was strangely, because it's a bit of a weird tangent into how I got to where I am. It was in the latter years of my drama side of that degree that I ended up doing a script writing module. And I wrote this script that featured, I think it was 4 actors. It was very, very small. I was very, very heavily obsessed with Samuel Beckett and wrote this play, and it just did very, very well in terms of marks through that course. And at the same time was put forward to be submitted to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And I never, unfortunately, got to go because I just didn't have the funding to go up there at the time. But I think that was the first inkling that, there was some success that could be had from my own creativity. And then when it came to trying to pick a career to go into, I, at the time, was a parkour free running instructor, as we so timely was talking about just before we started recording, and ended up teaching kids and adults across the county how to free run and jump buildings safely and, build up on their progress that way. And I unfortunately injured myself and then was forced to look at, what are my career options? What do I want to do? And since I did English and drama, I figured I might as well do something that uses some of those degrees. And ended up making contacts with someone who ran their own proofreading and editing business, primarily for nonfiction academic journals. And I ended up sort of almost being an apprentice to this person. And in the end, I got funding to run my own business doing that for 2 years. So I started to understand the journey of publishing, what it takes in terms of the different layers of editing, how to get a book typeset and sent to print and all that kind of stuff. Then from there, I went to an internship at the local university and worked in their publications team. So again, it was working much more broadly this time with, images, fonts, branding, everything for magazines and prospectuses and digital literature that went out as well. And it slowly started to build up on there. I had my son in 2014. And it was around that time that I started asking myself, as I think most new parents do, what is it that you want to represent to your kid? How can you be the best person of yourself for this bundle of pink flesh? And I ended up reading a book of short stories by Stephen King that I got gifted as a Secret Santa around that time. And just I was so obsessed with this book and just the short stories, because I'd never really been much of a short story reader before. And I ended up going really, really in depth just in terms of the different POVs he was writing with, the different different tenses, and just the variety of stories you can have from an author who is traditionally very horror just in this book. And it blew me away. So I started dabbling in short stories along the side of what I was doing. And that was really sort of the inception for where it started. I wrote my first novella, which was called Sins of Smoke, which I then stumbled across KDP and indie publishing. And I was by myself at that point. It was just literally me and the fact that I wanted a book on my shelf. And I released this 16,000 word novella into the world, and it was well received. It came out around Halloween time. It went up to the #1 spot on the charts in horror then, which is very, very encouraging to see. And everything kind of has just rolled on from there. So that was the initial inception. And then there is a lot between 2015 and now. So I mean, just a whistle stop tour being that I jumped in with a group of authors and formed the studio Hawk and Cleaver. We launched a podcast called The Other Stories, which is 20-minute fiction podcast, which has now had, I think, close to 9 million downloads in that time, and has recently won the This Is Horror Fiction Podcast of the Year award, which is amazing. I've written my own stuff. I've collaborated with lots of people, including Jay Thorne and Michael Anderley. And I've just enjoyed what I've been doing, written stuff that has brought me joy. And then over time, I've been very, very fortunate enough that has built up enough of a career that in 2019, I was able to go full time. And now I spend a lot of my time working on my own stuff. I'm a ghostwriter. I've launched my own horror imprint and my own nonfiction imprint, which I'm sure we'll go into. And it's all kind of accelerated just from that initial writing a play and having someone pat me on the back.
So it's been a quiet few years then. Yeah.
It's quite a few years. Yeah, it's very, very quiet.
But I'm having looked at your stuff, I can actually see where I can see your sort of brand in that internship, what you learned on that internship coming through, and that you've started kind of where many of us don't, on that other end, the sort of back end of it, with the editing and the proofreading.
Yeah.
And the sort of perhaps more technical side, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then moving into the first draft writing. So because your stuff is all really well put together, like your series all look immaculate.
Thank you.
Love the way everything looks.
Yeah,
I see that you've given a lot of thought to that.
Yeah, no, I have I had a real thing with and this was, before I heard the wider advice. Like I say, back in 2015 when I was putting that first book out, I had no insight at all into the indie community. I didn't know anyone. It was just per chance I kind of met some people. But the one thing that I really wanted to do was, if I was to have a book on my shelf, I didn't want it to not look like the other books on my shelf. I think a lot of it comes down to reader psychology. I know that if I pick up a book that looks shoddy with a cover, that it doesn't have the certain things in the front and the back, and just the way that the pages are laid out, even if it's a fantastic story, I know that my brain's telling me that it's not going to be, so I don't invest in it as much as I wanted to. Mm-hmm. And I spent, this isn't a joke or an exaggeration, I spent 2 days on this book studying fonts and trying to work out what the perfect font was to have inside that book. And I can't remember what I ended up settling on that I really, really liked. And then when I went to upload it to Amazon KDP, it wasn't a font that they accepted. They only have about, or back then they only had about 6 fonts that they accepted. So I went with Times New Roman. But every part of that, because back then as well, I was doing my own formatting, just learning it all in Word. And I was looking at font sizes, spaces between lines, sort of page layouts, what goes in the top and the bottom of each page, and sort of just I was meticulous in trying to make it look like a real book, because that was what I understood as a quality product that then would potentially sell. And I wouldn't accept anything less. So, some of that probably was massively influenced by the internship and everything else, because I'd worked around, university, you're not going to put out anything that isn't to a certain quality. When I was editing and proofreading non-academic journals, obviously there's a certain standard for each publishing house. And it's one of those things where I think at the time, I didn't realize how well that would serve me. But like you say, it did build that foundation for knowing how to put out a book that feels like a book to a reader who hopefully doesn't know between traditionally and independently published.
Yeah, no, it definitely shows, definitely. So you do write across genres.
Yes.
So does your heart lie with any particular one? I was curious as to if you've got a favourite.
I think because I've been battling with this for a few years, because I've gone into horror, I've gone a little bit into sci-fi, I've gone into post-apocalyptic, and I think just generally it's not so much a genre that I like, more as the tone and the atmosphere and the feeling. I've had I say this a lot, I've had quite a simple nondescript childhood. It's very like I've had no real sort of issues or anything I can complain about, and I feel lucky in that way. But I think because of that, I do explore a lot of the darker themes and a lot of the darker side of life through my fiction. So, the horror that I write explores, I'm not so much interested in slasher, gore, any of that stuff. I really like to explore the human condition through horror. So usually how that shows itself in my work is that it will be people trapped in situations where all of the gadgets, all of the luxuries and everything is stripped, and all that's left are base human emotions and interactions. So my latest book, When Winter Comes, is about a town in northern Alaska who, it's a different life anyway. They're isolated. They're hundreds of miles from anywhere, sort of modern. But then it gets blanketed by this freak storm, and sort of creatures come out of the storm and take over the town. And even though a lot of people might argue that, it's a horror and it's the monsters that make that story, for me, it's really the interactions between the characters and the things that they do to try and survive. Because you can be the nicest person to someone standing next to you at a bank, or an absolutely horrible person standing next to someone at the bank. But if suddenly everything closed down, the power went down, the doors locked, and you were strapped in there for 5 days, I'm sure how your emotions showed themselves would change quite a lot. So I think that's kind of what I like to write in terms is that human condition. It's that reality. It's that sort of gritty, a bit darker. And I like the genres where I feel like I can express myself freely without restriction. So that often comes back to horror, because really there aren't many limits in horror. But at the minute I am going for a bit of an internal struggle is the wrong word, but reassess and looking at going into a bit more of a darker fantasy side of things. So I'm currently doing a bunch of percolating and research into, dark fantasy, I'd say, but sort of quite dark fantasy along the lines of H.P. Lovecraft's sort of Cthulhu and his mythology and that kind of thing, to see if I can bring something to that.
Oh, well, it's I think it's one of the lovely things about being an indie author is you have that flexibility, and wherever your heart is taking you, your passions are taking you at any given time, you can follow that. So
I will say that it doesn't lend well or as well to sales. So you do see a lot of the people that can stick to a genre and can really sort of like nail down a world or a universe or like a series with a character. You tend to give yourself a bit more of an advantage, because hopping around, what I have found is that even the people who enjoyed my apocalyptic books, which I'd argue are quite horror, there's zombies and there's that kind of stuff in there, they aren't as easy to convert over to my horror, because it's a different feeling, it's a different world, it's a different genre. So I thought they would cross over, but I'm having to essentially manage 2 different mailing lists, 2 different overarching genres, just to try and keep those books moving.
The human psychology, it's guessing.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned it here, and it's mentioned in your bio as well, that you've got you host multiple podcasts, you're writing, coaching, ghostwriting, you've got a community which we're going to talk about a little bit later. So there's a lot going on. You've obviously got family too. There's lots going on. one of the questions I often get from my audience is, well, how do you balance all of the things going on? So for you, how do you manage to balance all those different aspects of your life?
So I think the first thing to say on that is that it's a process that evolves over time. So it was never a case of I sat down and went, I'm going to do all these things at once. It's been an evolution of, where my interests have lied, what things I found that readers and other authors have reacted to and have gone well to sort of build my business. But in the beginning, it started with me just writing a story. And then as time has gone by, I've met more people. When I joined the Hawk and Cleaver guys, I was writing my own stuff, but then also working with them on the podcast. And it's very much it's an ever ongoing process of reevaluation and being really brutal and critical about your time and whether or not things are working for you. Mm-hmm. So even just a couple of days ago, and I don't know if this is video, but on my board, I've got an entire sweep of things in which I spent my entirety of Monday writing down everything that I was doing to look at what I need to be doubling down on and what I need to stop doing. Because I think as time goes by, we say yes to stuff, we say no to stuff, and we end up becoming unaware of where our priorities lay. So I often, every few months or so, will have this a week or two where I feel really foggy in the brain, and then I have to have these moments where I just stop, literally lay it all out, and put stuff in tiers as well. So in the example next to me, I've got categories for sort of the non-fiction activated author stuff that I do. Everything that's fiction for me falls under my horror imprint, Devil's Rock Publishing. And then I've also got podcasts and, client work and things that I do. So I lay that out, and then I sort of spider diagram all the different assets of that, anything that's outstanding, smaller little projects, and just be brutal with my time. Like there's so many more things that I want to be doing, and so many things that really draw my passion that I want to get involved in. But now that I'm in a position where I'm a full-time author, there is an element where I have to prioritize some stuff that brings income and then leave myself enough room that I can still explore my passion. Because I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is they'll go entirely down what brings me money and then forget about, this is still should be something that you enjoy. So there's a lot of projects on there that are passionate things, are things that I really want to do. I've had to either push back or just basically simplify. So rather than working on 3 at once, I'm working on 1 at the minute, because I'm working on a lot of things behind the scenes. But what I have found just repeatedly, again and again and again, is anytime I do fully focus and prioritize on the business income and scaling that and just that, I hit a wall, and I get there's a voice inside me that just basically stops me from doing other things and then pulls me back into the things that I enjoy. And I was actually speaking to, because I do consultancy as well with authors, and I was doing a power hour yesterday with a client, and I could tell in what they were telling me that they were writing across 3 genres, and they kept coming back to the 2 that were making them money, and that's what they wanted to write, or not, that's what they wanted to write, air quotes. But then when they actually were speaking to me, in between the gaps, the passion and the fire always came back to this genre that they didn't think would sell. And it's that kind of thing where I'm like, yeah, you can create a career out of stuff that you don't enjoy that sells. So I'm not in any way saying anything against romance, but this is always a good example to come to, because if you can hit the right vein in romance, you can do a very, very very good career in that. You can make a lot of money because they're just voracious readers. You can get a series building. Like it's a very good way to make money in fiction. But when you get on that treadmill and you're making that money, you'll keep getting pulled back to the things that you love more. And you got to remember that in building any business, there has to be that balance of, yes, this brings me money, but also what's going to keep me going in the long term. And the only thing that I have seen keeps people going in the long term is in some way finding the passion in what they're doing, and not just stepping back and going, it's all for the money. Even because I realize this is a very long answer, but even in as I say, I've written with Michael Anderley in his Getherian Gambit universe, and he has a company called LMBPN with a lot of authors. And I've met a lot of authors in there that have written very, very fast for short periods to pump out a load of books. And one of the common denominators in that situation is so many of those authors who were rapid releasing their books are now coming back to wanting to write slower and in a different genre to what they were writing, because, it's commerce versus passion. So you can make money very quickly by doing the right things. But at the same time, in my opinion, if you're going to build a business that's sustainable, that serves you and what you want to do long term, even though it can be a slower build, focus on the stuff that actually lights your fire, because then it becomes easier to keep moving forward with that.
Oh, so much good stuff in there. Kind of thinking about our listeners and where they are, I think the three things that sort of came out of what your answer there was that this is an ever evolving process as well, that balancing of life and everything else. And so keep reassessing. Nothing is set in stone.
No.
Prioritizing what is important. That kind of came out as well, that a lot of my listeners are working full time and they're sort of writing on the side, and so there will be times when perhaps the writing has to take a second place, but then there are other times when you can give it priority, so just be aware of that. And then thirdly, for longevity, it's good to be doing something that we're passionate about and that brings joy. And that's so worth remembering.
It's when you start off, I think most people have this very rose-tinted view of what writing is as a career, and after a few years you very quickly learn what the realities are, and you can just put your time into writing, and if that brings you joy, then by all means, that's like, there's literally nothing wrong as long as you're enjoying what you're doing and you're happy with it. But like a perfect example of just steering into the wind, with the wind, whatever the expression is this time last year, I was just beginning to get my author coaching services up and running. And in November of last year, I ran a boot camp for NaNoWriMo. And that was meant to be a 1 month. I take a group of authors, I help them write 50,000 words in 30 days. And when December came around, pretty much, and this is an exaggeration, about 80% of the members were begging me to continue the group. And since then, that group has now become a fundamental part of my week. It's where I interact with a lot of authors. Obviously, business-wise, it is an income generator as well. But it's something that a year ago, I would never have in 1,000 years have expected to be in the position to run this. And it's just a perfect example of how even if, or just things can take you by surprise. And often that can be a good thing if you embrace it. But if I had, for example, stuck steadfast to, no, this is what I'm going to do with other stuff, then I might not have let this opportunity flourish. So take those opportunities, assess them, and like we said, prioritize and make sure that you enjoy it as you do it.
Yeah. Well, talking of NaNoWriMo, you and that boot camp, you're running it again this year. So tell us about it and how it works.
So it's very, very simple. The idea came from, I have done a lot of stuff in the past with groups and leading groups. And I know that when you're trying to achieve a goal, if you're doing it in a group surrounded by people also trying to achieve that goal, it can just maximize your chances of actually doing the thing that you set out to do. There's a reason that, in writing, when we're writing books, that people recommend accountability partners, because when you're in a room doing something by yourself, the only person you're accountable to is you. And in the weirdest and most annoying way possible, even though our brains know that this stuff is good for us and we want it, we don't do it. And it just hurts. So I put a call out. I put together this Nano Bootcamp group. And the idea was simple. It was that we would all come together during November, and several times a week, I would run Zoom sprints where we all jump on camera. We have 20 minutes writing, followed by what turned out to be 7-minute breaks. We trialed with the break times to see what worked well. People like 7 minutes for some reason. Then we do another 20 minutes, 7-minute break, then another 20 minutes. And just having that punctuation mark in the week where writers knew they had to be in that room, and that was the time to work. People honed their productivity, they focused, they got the words down, they had fun, they met other people in the community doing that same challenge. And then as part of that as well, I would every morning send everyone a message with daily motivational message, just to be like, oh, you're on day 8. I know we're starting to get tired now, but remember, we're almost a third of the way through this challenge. And just those kind of snippets based off of, progress, quotes from people that I found inspiring, people's stories on digging deeper, and, the fact that pain is only temporary, failure lasts forever, that kind of thing, just to really buoy people along and make it so that people had the best chance that they could of hitting those 50,000 words. And the national average, or the international average, for people who have successfully completed the Nano Challenge is just under 20%. And in the bootcamp last year, I had a 78% pass rate on people who hit 50,000 or higher. So for me, it's a no-brainer in how community and accountability can just help you achieve the things you want to do. Because as writers, and I say this definitely for myself, and I know a lot of people in my group confirm this, we don't often live in, how do I say this? We don't live in reality around people who get what we're trying to do. I mean, digitally, it's quite easy to find. You can jump into Facebook book groups. You can do, join communities as people do. But like, my dad doesn't get it. My mum doesn't get it. My ex didn't get it. Like, there's a whole plethora of people who live locally that they're not writers and they just don't understand what I'm trying to achieve. So I do remember doing my first nano back in 2016, I believe it was. It might have been 2015. And I was working a full-time day job. I was snatching moments. I had to walk past my group of colleagues who were having lunch just to get to the library and have that awkward kind of like, yeah, I'm not sitting with you today just so I can get my words in. I would stay, because we were attached to a bar where I used to work. I'd go to the bar after work and just sit and type on this like little tablet and keyboard and things. And I was alone. It was me just trying to drive me, and it was incredibly difficult. Mm-hmm. And then the following year, I actually got a few accountability partners, did it with other people, and just having those other people around you and just someone that you can say, oh, I'm really struggling today, or this is really hard, I don't think I'm going to quite make it, or, I really need help with this plot point. Mm-hmm. It's just surrounding yourself in people that are trying to achieve the same stuff as you, just as it's proven in the numbers, it works wonders to actually achieving that goal. So mm-hmm. that was last year's boot camp, and this year we return for round 2. So I've currently had a stack full of new authors jump in. A lot of the authors from last year have actually stayed in the community through the entire year. And I'm very, very excited to be running it again and seeing how people can hit that target.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely be linking to that. So anyone who's listening and is interested, mm-hmm. They can go to the show notes and link through to get signed up and join you for November.
Beautiful.
So you've mentioned there how important you certainly found having accountability partners are, having a community. And I imagine that through Hawk and Cleaver that you had mm-hmm. good community there too.
Yes.
So is this the... You mentioned also that through doing Nano, the bootcamp last year, people were looking for that community to continue. Is that what has now become the activated authors community that you host?
Yes, it's like we were saying earlier, it's an evolution. So in November it was the NaNoWriMo bootcamp. In December it was the Nano editing camp. And then in January, it became a group called Willcocks Writers, which was very much just, it was just, writers that write with me, Daniel Willcocks. And then I kind of, over sort of 6 months from January, as I was running this group, as I was kind of looking into my own nonfiction and coaching and all that kind of stuff, just the seed of the idea came to find a way to build the brand and link, because a lot of the stuff that I was doing started to feel quite disparate. So I tried to find a way to link them all together, to unify them and put together a package in a way that it can help authors in the most effective way possible. So it's still kind of a little bit in transition in terms of stuff on my website and things, but everything as of the end of September merged into activated authors, and that's where we're going forward with. So yeah, that's the community that I run.
That's exciting. So tell us a little bit about it. What could, if somebody wanted to become a member of activated authors, what sort of thing might they expect from it?
So my big thing with it is I wanted to create a home for authors. I looked at it from a lot of different angles, and there are many places you can go online to do marketing for authors, to understand business for authors, ads, craft, very, very specific things. But in my own journey and in the people that are in the community with me, one thing that I found that was a common thing that kept occurring that I haven't seen elsewhere was a focus on healthy productivity, because there are so many people busting their ass trying to get their book written, and writing a book is undoubtedly hard. Like, you can't argue otherwise. It's a lot of mental work. If you've got family, if you've got a full-time job, I get it. I spent quite a few years squeezing in time wherever I could just to write, and I was exhausted by the end of it. And so over the past, well, I'd say a year or two, but pretty much the past 5 years, I've been doing a lot of personal growth in terms of my own life outside of writing. I've done a lot of research and practicing with mindset, with nutrition, with fitness, with just habits and routines, and really trying to find ways to make it so that I could sustainably be productive, because I wanted a career as an author. And the only way I could do that was to not burn out, was to find ways to actually consistently put out work. And as we all know, that, you know, the next book sells the last book. So kind of keep creating products and putting out good stories into the world. And so Activated Authors is pretty much a culmination of all of that. It's, like I say, it's a home for authors. For me, the focus is really on understanding each author that comes into the community, letting you be respected as an individual, because I think you go to certain Facebook groups and there's definitely the herd mentality that everyone is capable of achieving this in this way. And the reality is that's just not true, because not only do we have our own lives, our own family, our own work schedules, our own preferred sleep schedules, our own fitness levels, our own biology, our own nutrition, all of these different factors that make us just a unique person. Lost my train of thought.
It's a holistic approach, it feels like.
Yeah, it's a very holistic approach. So it's people come into, we have a Slack channel, Slack community with lots of different channels. So we have sort of everything from, there's a meditation channel in there. There's a venting channel for people that have had like just a crap day and they just want to vent it and have people just say, oh no, that sucks. But then we have like craft, we do have business and marketing and things in there. And I'm obviously in there a lot. I try and stimulate conversation. I answer questions where I can. We have everyone in the community, from USA Today best-selling authors to people who haven't yet published. And if people ever do jump in there or get the opportunity to jump in there and try it, you'll just see that everyone's supportive and everyone understands that, you know, there's not one way to write. And that really is the onus. I think I found one reason I've gone to Slack for this kind of forum is that I personally started to get quite discharmed, not the word, but disheartened, I guess, with social media, in that places like Facebook, if you go into groups, if you go into pages and things, it's really a gamble as to whether or not you're going to get an answer or an answer in the first place, or anything that's tangible. And it's built for lots of people, so you don't really get that unique, considered response. And then I looked into sort of Patreon as an option as well. But one thing that I found with Patreon is it doesn't really facilitate community. You can comment to creators and creators can comment back, but there's no real interaction between patrons who have pledged to you. So I've built this community, like I say, on Slack. You get that within the Activated Authors membership. And there are 2 levels. So if you come in at the light membership, which is £10 a month at the minute, I am doing a beta period just to make sure everything's working as it should. So £10 gets you into the Slack community and gets you into our monthly socials that we run, where we do sort of like, we've got one for Halloween, which is fancy dress and it's games and things. We can just all just socialize with other writers and have some fun. And then the upper end is £30 a month, and that gets all of the writing sprints that I run every week as well. So as we kind of mentioned with the bootcamp, my writing sprints have very much just stayed the same. So it's focused work. In the breaks, people can ask questions. You can, you know, chat to each other, whatever it is that people want at that time. And then there's also sort of discount bonuses and stuff as well. But that's kind of the Activated Authors experience. It really is, if you're an author who just wants a community, it just wants to be around passionate, driven individuals who are all looking to level up their own craft in their own way, then that's where we go. I mean, like I say, we've got career authors, USA Today best-selling authors, and then we've got people that literally just want to write for fun, and they're in there just to meet people and have a good time.
No, it sounds great. I'm part of a Slack community as well, and it's a great tool. It's a great way of communicating, and as you say, kind of fostering more of a community, and you get to know everybody who's in it, rather than not necessarily than a big Facebook group that's got just too many
thousands
faces.
of people. Yes.
Yeah. So if anybody is looking for a community, I recommend Activated Authors, even just kind of on that, the idea that you've got this close-knit community. And I love that you do the writing sprints as well. I think a lot of people are coming around to realizing the benefits of those.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Well, gosh, you are busy.
A little bit.
You did sort of, just talking of writing sprints, because one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you are so busy, what are the tips that you use for your own productivity to mention, you know, to get all these different things done? What can you share with us, 1 or 2 of your own tips?
Yeah, of course. So I think the biggest one for me, and this has been proven again today, is my top productivity tip is making sure you get decent sleep. Because I'm generally someone who works better in the mornings, and I had a very late night last night on a couple of different calls. and weirdly enough with work. So it was good in a way, but like I try and make sure that if I do have a lot of writing to do the next day, that I do get a decent night's sleep. And then I tend to be a person that I'll get up and I'll get at least the first chunk of words done, because I like to start the day feeling ahead and not feeling like I've got more work sort of trailing as the day goes on. So I'll generally sit down at the keyboard the minute I've got a coffee, and I'll try and get 1,000 words just to start my day. I think if you build a habit and a routine of getting to the keyboard the same time every day, that's just going to serve you unbelievably well in the long term. When I was working a full-time day job, the only time I could get any consistent writing in was before I went to work, and I'd have to leave for work at 7:30. My son would be up at about 7:15. So there was a point where I was getting up at 5 every morning just to have an hour where I could get some words in and just write the books. And it's hard to begin with. It's undoubtedly hard, and it takes anywhere from sort of 14 to 28 days before you actually start to feel used to the routines that you build. But I would find that getting up at 5, getting those words down anywhere from, I think at that time it was between sort of 300 words to 800 words, and then just that habit and that consistency builds and helps you get through your book and just at least get something on page. And I actually found that once I was able to stop doing that morning routine, I still continued doing it because my body was used to it. I've kind of come out of it a bit now, like I get up a bit later, but that was a huge thing. And also just tracking my words. That's always a big thing. I think when you're lost in the middle of a draft and you have no idea how many words you've got left, how many you're writing each day, kind of, you're not tracking your progress, that makes it a bit harder. So I do have a sheet in which I give myself some kind of deadline, even if it's just a deadline for myself. And then I've got a sheet that I've made myself with sort of formulas and stuff on Excel, where I put in my workout every day, and it tells me how many I've got remaining each day, how long that should take, and everything else. And that visual representation just keeps you driven and keeps you moving forward.
I think my favorite one of your tips though is sleep. It's amazing just how that does just set you up for the whole day. And no matter if you're someone who needs 6 hours or someone who needs 8 hours, as long as you get the right amount for you, then it will set you up for the next day. So
and again, I think
you're maybe the first person to have said that to me.
Well, this is exactly what I'm saying. Like, I understand that in order to be productive with writing, you have to write. But the thing that I'm really trying to bring to Activated Authors is to be a writer. It's a lifestyle. It's not just a hobby. It's not just a passion. Like, if you're not eating right, if you're not exercising, if you're not getting your sleep, if you're not connecting with the right friends, because I know a lot of writers who have come to my group because their particular group of friends were just dragging them down, or they were just trying to just gently tugging away at that dream, like, what are you doing this for? Why can't you do this? Why can't you go nights out instead of staying at home and reading or doing the book that you want to work on? And so there are so many factors that aren't necessarily to do with the actual writing. They're just, over the years, the more I've thought about it, the more I've gone, it's not just a thing that you do, it's a life that you live.
Yes, it is. It's a life that you live. So are you working on anything for yourself at the moment? Are you working on any of your own projects?
I am between projects at the minute. So I've recently brought out the collected edition of my When Winter Comes horror apocalyptic serial, which I'm very proud of, very happy with how that turned out. And as I mentioned earlier, at the minute, I'm kind of in a bit of a phase at the minute of looking at what my next projects are. So I'm doing a lot of researching into dark fantasy, come across a genre that I'd not heard of before called grimdark fantasy, which is interesting. It's a bit more of it's dark fantasy, but with a very gritty underlaying tone through the whole thing, if that makes sense. So kind of more the Witcher side of things. And well, I'm trying to think of more examples, but as you can tell, I've got a long way to go. So I'm allowing myself, while I am in a bit of a busy period at the minute, to just read and research and percolate. And then it'll probably be somewhere around February, March, I think I'm going to be diving into whatever my next fiction project is. But I've also come out of a long period of writing a lot of fiction for myself and also ghostwriting. So what year are we on? 2021. From the beginning of 2020 to now, I have written 37 books.
Wow.
For myself and for clients.
Okay.
And so what I'm doing at the minute is really just hitting pause, reevaluating what I want to do, and then I'm going to be going sort of headfirst into whatever that is next year.
Gosh, okay, exciting times ahead.
Yes.
Well, listen, I have loved chatting with you. I have gotten a lot of tips from you too, so thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Just before we sign off, please do let listeners know where they can find out more about you, and in particular, of course, about Activated Authors.
Of course. So everything that I do is over at danielwillcocks.com, and that's WILLCOCKS. And then everything for Activated Authors is over at activatedauthors.com. Go over and check them out.
Fantastic. I'll be sure to link to those. Well, Daniel, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.